Hello and welcome to another episode of Read It with Whiskey. This is the place to be if you are a fantasy or sci-fi reader, and this is definitely going to be one of the best episodes. My name is Lisa Johnston and I am your host. I am the author of the Shockwave series, and you guys, my book too is out. I'll talk about it in a minute. All right, so this week we are talking with Lisa Johnston all about her book, Wakeless. Like I said last week, this is one of my favorite books of 2021. I absolutely adored it, and you can tell when we get into the interview in a second. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Lisa. Lisa is a communication graduate from the University of Calgary. She's an established writer and editor in the magazine and corporate publishing world. Wakeless is her first fiction novel. When not catering to the needs of her husband and two sons, she enjoys traveling, reading, and ocean walks near her home on Vancouver Island. We get a little bit into Lisa's career and how interesting it is, so I won't talk about it much right now. But this being her first book, this was a long time coming, and we're going to talk about it. It took 25 years for this book to get out into the world. So let me tell you what it's all about. One future, one chance at redemption. Emma has somehow survived the wreckage of the 21st century. Gas reserves have run dry, hospitals have shut, and deadly diseases are rampant. She now faces her greatest challenge. Discovered living in a basement hideout, she is proclaimed clean and moved to Redemption City. Despite escaping the contaminated world, Emma soon learns that life is no better in the promised utopia. Secrets abound, no one is free, and eyes are always watching. A young woman in a repressive role, Emma begins unraveling the true purpose of Redemption City. Rebelling against the male hierarchy, she reluctantly joins forces with a potential ally. Troubled by ghosts of her past and an unreliable vision of reality, Emma must find a path to redemption or pay the ultimate price. This book was incredible. We talk about the similarities between this book and my own second book in the Shockwave series. I think that was one of the reasons why I loved it so much, was because of that connection. So enough of me talking, let's get into it. Welcome to Read It with Whiskey, the interview podcast featuring science fiction and fantasy authors. My name is Lisa Juntunen, your host and the author of the Shockwave series. I am also a book club moderator, speaker, and avid reader, truly invested in every author's story. Within this podcast, I bring to you, the reader, all the behind-the-scenes secrets to how these guest indie authors bring their books into the world. If you are a sci-fi fantasy reader, then you need to hear from these authors. Let's learn about the person behind the page. Sit back, sip some whiskey, and lean in to these self-published authors. All right, you guys, today is the day that I have been waiting for quite some time. Today is the release of Oscillation Rising. So book 2 of the Shockwave series is finally out right now. And to celebrate, I'm going to read you the blurbs of both Transient Pulse and Oscillation Rising, because if you haven't read book 1, you can't read book 2. So Transient Pulse. When the nation is hit by a mysterious shockwave, the resulting power outage interrupts the world as we know it. Everything that was powered on at the time of the Transient Pulse is destroyed, seizing cities and populations in mass explosions caused by the rippling aftershocks. The lingering darkness severs society in two: those who choose ruinous control, stealing and murdering for provisions, and those who begin to create plans for long-term survival. The latter includes Dixie, a strong yet hesitant young woman living in the heart of Southern California. Dixie is forced to build plans to navigate the country in hopes to find a northern safe zone with Paul, a level-headed survivalist. When Paul goes missing, Dixie must overcome her chronic uncertainty and make the first of many life or death decisions. Will Dixie choose to wait for Paul, using up their limited supplies in the delay, or will Dixie begin the journey on her own, possibly having to turn to the dark side of society to survive? Okay, so that was Transient Pulse, and now Oscillation Rising, out today. Forced to flee the one place Dixie thought was going to be her refuge, she sets out to reunite with her lost allies. An ongoing rain of shockwaves continues to devastate the nation, causing an electrically enclosed community, Oscillation, to rise as a haven of hope to remaining survivors. Determined to uncover the secrets of her past, Dixie now pursues Oscillation with her small group of companions, discovering more secrets to add to her ongoing hunt for the truth. Will Dixie find the answers she seeks? Or will more mysteries be unleashed surrounding her family and the future of the nation's existence? So this book was so much fun to write and really the characters took over. I'm going to do an entire episode all about Oscillation Rising in the maybe near, maybe far future, as well as an episode about Transient Pulse, and then book 3, which is going to be coming out in the spring of 2022. So if you read Transient Pulse, then head on over and purchase Oscillation Rising. And if you haven't read book 1 yet, then definitely go ahead and grab Transient Pulse. And if you are hesitant or maybe wondering more about the world before diving into this trilogy, then go ahead and visit my website because there is a free companion story available now. You can go through either my website, www.laurajlive.com, and under buy books there is a link where you can get the free companion story, or if you prefer Instagram, go to my handle at laurajlive, LauraJaylive, and there is a link to my link tree where you can get the freebie there. Either way, the companion story is a really good introduction into the series. You do not have to read the books before reading the companion story, nor do you have to read the companion story before the books. It's just a great little tie-in to basically introduce the idea to the world. All right, so let's get into this episode with Lisa. Lisa, and welcome to Read It with Whiskey. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm good, thank you. And I can't express how appreciative I am for you to have me on today's episode.
I am so excited to talk to you about your book, about a lot of other things. You've got some amazing stuff coming up in the next few years, even in your world of writing. So we're going to dive into a little bit about that. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of everything, tell us, why did you decide that you wanted to become a writer?
I think I've always wanted to be a writer. I've never done well in that 9 to 5 sort of regimented lifestyle. I just found there's no creativity. I need to write when I feel I can write, and I really can't imagine myself doing anything else. Even from the time I was a child, I was writing small stories and notebooks and journals, and unfortunately, I don't have those anymore because I would love to go back and read them and see what they were like. But I can't imagine anything else than being a writer.
I love that. And I feel like a lot of people on the podcast are like that. It's like it's been ingrained in them from a very young age. Either they loved reading, they loved writing and journaling, that type of thing. So how has that played into the rest of your life? What do you do now full time?
I'm not a full-time author, unfortunately. Someday I'd like to get there, but I am a full-time writer and editor. I am the editor of a national magazine for the death care profession in Canada. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but I spend a lot of my daytime hours pre-COVID attending funeral conferences, embalming seminars, talking to funeral directors, cemeterians. Some people, when they hear that, they think, "Oh, that's kind of weird." But it allows me to write and allows me to keep doing that for my career. So I'm grateful and happy for any writing projects that come my way.
Definitely. Do you think having such a close grip on death and that whole scene, has that influenced your own creative writing, especially for Wakeless, which we're going to talk about in a second?
I don't think so because I wrote Wakeless prior to that.
Oh, that's right. We got to talk all
Yes,
about
I know
that too.
that comes into play as well. But I think if anything, it reinforces to appreciate each day and to work when you have the opportunity and to get things out when you have a chance. Because as we're going to talk about, I let this book sort of languish on my computer for a long, long time. And it was the COVID situation. And I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to profit from COVID, but it was the situation of that bit of quiet time that let me revisit it and get it out there.
Yeah, so let's just dive right into it because we're kind of on the topic already. So Wakeless sat in a drawer for 25 years,
Yeah.
and now it has finally come to fruition. So tell our listeners, what is Wakeless all about?
Well, it's written in journal format by my main protagonist. Her name is Emma. She's a young woman who has grown up in the second half of the 21st century when everything has kind of turned really, really bad. And at the time, near the beginning of the book, she's found living in a basement hideout in her family home. She did go to school for a bit. It was kind of a weird situation. The school board shut, medical is all defunct. There's not a lot going on in life. She doesn't have a lot of social skills, a lot of communication skills, but she is discovered living in that basement hideout where she's taken away and she's put into sort of a quarantine facility, proclaimed clean, and then moved to another sort of utopia community where she has a second chance. But is it utopia? That's kind of where the story gets confusing,
That's the
maybe.
big mystery.
Yeah.
Oh, I just love this story because it plays on so many different fears. And it is ironic that you did publish when all of this COVID stuff was happening, because it has that type of vibe. Like, what could happen if society were to fall apart and there were mass people dying and things like this? And so it's very ironic that you were able to get back to it within the last couple of years and get it out now, because I think a lot of people have fear. And so escaping into this alternate reality could be a little bit intense for some people. You self-published this book, but in the past, had you thought about traditionally publishing, or were you always
I
thinking you'd self-publish?
Yeah, no, initially I had wrote it when I was in university, and in the years kind of that followed, I revised it or finished it. And I had tried the traditional route. I had sent it to our manuscript or synopsis to a few literary agents and publishing houses, but I just found it was so hard to get your foot in the door if you didn't know someone that could kind of open that door for you, and they didn't know your name. I didn't get much response. And then I graduated from university, I got married, we bought a house, we had kids, and life got busy, and I needed to make money to give them a life. So it always sort of sat there. And then when COVID did hit and some of my clients had to kind of pull back some of their work and stuff, I had extra time during the day. I learned a little bit more about the self-publishing world, and I met some connections, and the people in there are just so wonderful, from the other writers to the bloggers to podcasters like you. And I thought, the more I delved into it, I thought this is something I could do. This is something I could get my book out there into other people's hands, which is exciting and terrifying. But it gave me the opportunity to actually get the book into physical or ebook format.
Exactly. And when you revisited it, then you had basically finished it back at
Mm-hmm.
university. So
Mm-hmm.
did you have to rewrite a lot of it, or is it basically how it was back then?
It's basically how it was. I found some typos and things
Mm-hmm.
that just because of my years of editing, I knew a little bit more for that. But the actual storyline and most of it is untouched. It's basically what it was, which kind of surprised me because I didn't have as much writing experience at that time. I added a little bit. I did have a professional editor look at it, and we made a few revisions here and there, but it really wasn't all that much.
Well, that's exciting that you were able to revisit something so complete, because there's a lot of people who come on the show and they say, yeah, it was in my cupboard for 5 or 10 years, and I basically rewrote it all because it was so terrible. So
Right.
you were
Yeah.
one of the few who had a good experience with revisiting a project, so that's
Mm-hmm.
exciting. So
Yeah.
how did it feel then when you finally held the physical copy in your hand?
Yeah, it's surreal. It really is when it arrived in the mail and I opened it up and I looked at it, and there's my name and there's the picture, and some people said, "Is that you on the cover?" No, that's not. I'll get to that. But it was so exciting, but it was also, I found it very scary because I felt like I was letting a piece of myself out into the world, or I was letting people into my mind. And I think I lead a pretty normal life, and that's why I like to get into these sort of strange or weird characters and scenarios. And when people were reading it, it made me kind of feel that they're going to look at me and say, oh my gosh, I thought Lisa was so normal and she's crazy apparently. And where did you come up with that? You have to be crazy. And what were you thinking? And because it is kind of dark story, as you know, and I know it's not for everybody, and I know that's the way every book is, though. But I actually find it kind of scary to let it go.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can relate to that. Us as authors, we put our work out there, and it's our baby. We've been working so hard on it. We put so much passion into it. And so not only is it scary for us to put it out there and have other people's opinions, but it's kind of, yeah, putting your own self out there, because this is what
Mm-hmm.
you created within yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
but it was so good. And I really, really enjoyed it. You should be so proud. It was such a fun read. I love all dystopian and sci-fi type books. My own series is in those genres. And
Yep.
so our books actually have a lot in common, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But I wanted to talk more about the inspiration. So this entire concept of the world spiraling down, humans being almost completely wiped out, where did this come from? What was inspiring you to write this?
I get that question a lot, and my answer is always the same. It's Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. I had read that as a teenager, and then I watched the movie version, which starred Natasha Richardson and Aidan Quinn. And the story really resonated with me. It just, and Margaret's writing from the start, because I mean, I love all types of books, but
Mm-hmm.
she created like a society and a governmental system and roles. And I just found it absolutely mind-boggling that she could come up with all this stuff. And I wanted something like that. I wanted to create something that was like a Gilead, that was just so bizarre, but in ways it could happen. It's not aliens coming down. Well, I guess some people believe aliens are coming down, but it's not machines taking over the earth, although maybe that could happen too. But I think it's a little more maybe believable, and that makes it a bit more scary. And so my inspiration definitely was The Handmaid's Tale.
And I really enjoyed that book. I started watching the TV show that just came out recently. And
Hmm.
I've also just read The Testaments. Did you read that
Okay,
one?
I did. Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love the world that she's created, and
Hmm.
when I saw that that was one of the inspirations for Wakeless, I was like, yes, this is why I love this book so much, is because we have the same reading style also.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's dive in a little bit. So this is set in the future, far into the future. Our main character is
Yeah.
Emma, and she is, like you explained earlier, she is found in a basement and she's brought into this place, this quarantine, to where she's going to be deemed worthy enough to move forward into this next stage of repopulating the earth, essentially. So that time frame between when she was captured and then she goes into what you call the Redemption City is very dark. And the whole story is, like you said, a journal perspective of Emma. How difficult was that to write and be inside that character's mind as she's going through all this?
I didn't really find it that difficult to write. I think my life is very normal. So I like getting into the mind of a character that's a little out there and not quite so maybe calm and rational. So I enjoyed writing it from her standpoint. I have had other people ask if there'll be a sequel, and at this point, I don't have plans, but it could happen because people said they'd like to see it from a different maybe perspective of, because it is in one person's sort of view of that world, and maybe it would be different from Ryan or the
Mhm.
protectors who are the leaders of that community, and maybe that would happen down the road. But I liked being in Emma's mind, and I like when you write, you can be anything you want. You can be a
Mhm.
superhero, you can be a villain, you can be a young woman in a repressive role, and I just find it really fun and exciting or challenging, or to get into that mindset and to pretend you're someone else even when you're just sitting at your computer being still yourself. You're not really yourself.
Exactly. Was there any point in writing the book where Emma took the reins and took over what you had initially planned?
For sure. I'm not a plotter when I write. I know some people say that's the new way to write. I let my characters lead the story. So Emma truly led the story. And until the end, I had no idea what was going to happen either. And there were times when I was shocked at what she did. And there were times I wanted to yell at her, don't do that. Like, what are you doing? But she ultimately drove the story. I was just the one putting her thoughts on paper.
And you're working on a different project right now, which is
Yeah.
the Castor project. Is that
Mhm.
one, are you doing the same concept where you're pantsing and you're just writing it out? Or since it's a series, are you doing a little bit more plotting?
It is a series. It's a 3-book series. So I did a sort of, I think from the first one was a little bit more just the seat of my pants, but I knew I had to bring the story, or I knew I wanted to bring the story into 3 parts. So I I did sort of plot out what would happen in the second and what would happen in the third, but I didn't go into detail of as to maybe the relationships that would form or who might not make it, because sometimes I don't know that. So it's just the way I have to write to be creative. I don't know if I could follow a plotted. I think that would stifle my writing a
Yeah,
bit.
be a little bit too restrictive.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel too. Okay, so we kind of touched on how your story is kind of connected, not connected, but similar or inspired by The Handmaid's Tale. So let's talk a little bit about Redemption City and that whole process. You created this little world of Redemption City. Tell the listeners, what is this city?
Well, it's a domed environment that was created by a number of geniuses in the old world, as she refers to it. And so they had kind of seen what was happening in the world, resources running dry and medical systems collapsing. And so they had sort of formed their own community and started building this environment. And I actually got that idea when I was traveling. When I was in university, we went to Arizona and we had gone past the biosphere, and that kind of piqued my interest a bit, that there could you live in something like that permanently? And we created this Redemption City, which is protected from the sun and from the germs out there. And it's self-sufficient. It's got electricity from the solar panels. It has a farm with animals. It has a water system. And I tried not to go too technical with that because I'm not a scientist and I didn't want people to come back and say, no, that couldn't happen, right? So I kept Emma's knowledge of what was going on very vague because they never told her. Why would they tell her? She's sort of a common person. So she could only speculate how it was running. So I tried to sort of cover myself that way. But it's basically a self-sufficient environment. And they're hoping that through this small population of people that they can repopulate and keep mankind, I guess, alive.
I love that. And I like what you just said about Emma not completely understanding this domed structure and how everything is run, because that comes into play throughout the story, that her knowledge is going to limit her in a sense. But we also have a very similar situation within our books because your book, Wakeless, has this dome community. And in the second book in my series, Oscillation Rising, it's an electric dome society. And as I was writing, like right at the end of writing Oscillation Rising was when I read your book and I messaged you on Instagram. I said, oh my gosh, we have dome societies. We have to talk about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm not sure where my inspiration came from, but I mean, I've seen what you were talking about, the domed structures and kind of living that idea of could it be possible to have a self-sufficient community? And so reading your book, it totally brought me back to mine and just, I was like, yes, I found somebody who enjoys what I enjoy again.
Yeah, and I think I have read your book after we connected, and I know you mentioned that that's coming out in your second book, and I do see some similarities between the books, but I actually see more similarities with the Castor Project in terms of the characters. So, yeah, so I'm looking forward to reading your second book to see the connection with the dome, but I don't see your Dixie being that similar to Emma, but I see her being more like my next protagonist.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Your Emma character, it's all in her perspective, in her mental capacity is a lot different than Dixie's mental capacity in my book. So now I'm very entertained about the Castro Project. I mean, let's just dive into that a little bit. Can you give us a sneak peek about what this series is about?
It is dystopian as well. It takes place in the future. In this series of books, what's happened is North America, or the three big countries, Canada, the US, and Mexico, they fractured due to poor governments and disputes and stuff, which could happen. They fractured into all these little nations, and these nations are now, some of them are allies, some of them are warring, but they're small and they still need to trade to be able to survive. So the protagonist of the story, her name is Bree. She lives in a very poor country and they have no resources to trade. So they have to trade their people. So after you graduate from high school, everybody has to go on a trade mission. And she's traded to a brand new country called Castor that she knows nothing about. And when she lands there, she finds out that she is actually being traded to be used as human test subjects in a pharmaceutical regime kind of thing. And it's not a good situation again. So she has to find a way or find the right people to help her get out of that or to survive, basically.
Well, this is very exciting. I'm going to have to read these and bring you back on. We'll have a take two.
Right. Well, I've worked hard on getting the rough drafts all completed. All 3 books, the drafts are done, and I've just started going back to revising the first one. And I am hoping to sort of put them out in quick succession, probably in 2022, maybe a 2-3 month gap between each, because there's a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of each of them. And I know some readers don't like that, and they'll give you bad reviews, apparently, if your next book's not coming out for a while. So I'm keeping that in mind, that I kind of want them to follow each other quite quickly.
That's really exciting that you have this new series coming out. I'm also curious if you are going to decide to do a sequel to Wakeless or a different perspective. And I really like that the book ends on a note where, like you said, the reader can interpret basically how they want. And so I'm not going to say anything else, otherwise we would just give it away. Yeah. We would give away a lot if we talked any more about the book. So it wouldn't be Read It with Whiskey without talking a little bit about whiskey. So What is your favorite whiskey to drink?
Yeah, I'm not much of a drinker, so I had to think about that question when you had sent it to me. I guess I'd have to go back to my university days when I used to drink a bit of Crown Royal, which is like a Canadian rye with ginger ale. But now my drink of choice is coffee, and my latte maker is one of my best friends, or my writing companion anyway.
I love that. I'm definitely in both worlds. First half of my day is all coffee, and then at the end of the night, I might take a little whiskey on the rocks while I'm reading a book. Okay, so Lisa, where can our listeners find you, and where can they find your books?
Yeah, I do have a website, www.lisajohnstonauthor.com. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And my books are for sale currently. I'm Amazon exclusive, but I'm also on KDB on Kindle Unlimited as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was so much fun to talk with you.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I'm so glad that you reached out to me.
Talking with Lisa was so much fun, and I still just can't believe the similarities between our books. I'm really excited to read her new series that she talked about as well, because she said there's even more similarities with her trilogy and my trilogy with those new books that are going to be coming out. So, and like I said in the interview, once those books come out, I will definitely have to bring her back onto the podcast because she has so many big things coming. I'm just so excited to see everything that she brings into the world in the next few years. And next time on the Read It with Whiskey podcast, we are going to be talking to Irene Chow and her book, The Herb Witch's Apprentice. Not only is this book incredible fantasy, but Irene is also an incredible artist. So I'm definitely going to be talking to her all about her art and her art business. Her work is absolutely incredible. So definitely check us next time with Irene, as well as go ahead and get Wakeless because you need to read that one. And of course, Oscillation Rising is out today, September 28th, 2021, and I would love for you to go and grab a copy right now. I'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to an episode of Read It with Whiskey. I am your host, Laura Juntunen, and I just wanted to personally hop in and say thank you so much for listening. Your support of the podcast means so much to me, and I would really appreciate it if you could go onto your favorite podcast platform and rate and review the show. By rating the show, you're going to help more people find the podcast so then we can grow. Once you review the show, share it on your social media, share your favorite episode with your friends, and come back next time to hear more from self-published authors. I'll talk to you soon.